Welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast with your host, Alvin Bonds II. Join us each week as Alvin explores the relationship between leadership and families by interviewing leaders in different fields all over the world. Alvin believes that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families.
Hi, and welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast. I'm your host, Alvin Bonds II, and thank you for joining me for episode 2. I'm so glad to have you back again as we talk about leadership and families. Today, I interview Dr. Nicholas V. Holland III. I'm very excited to interview him today and looking forward to hearing what he has to say about leadership and how it has impacted his family and how his family has informed his individual and professional leadership. I was reading an article this week from Huffington Post from Dr. Travis Bradberry. Dr. Bradberry is an author and HuffPost contributor. And the name of the article, which is similar, it comes from his book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And the name of the article from the Huffington Post is 12 Daily Habits of Exceptional Leaders. Number 4 on his list of 12 is self-awareness. And I'm going to read just a little bit from that article. He lists a Latin proverb, quote, "It is absurd that a man should rule others who cannot rule himself." That's a Latin proverb. And Dr. Bradberry goes on to say, contrary to what Dilbert might have us believe, leaders' gaps in self-awareness are rarely due to deceitful, Machiavellian motives or severe character deficits. In most cases, leaders, like everyone else, view themselves in a more favorable light than other people do. Self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence, a skill that 90% of top-performing leaders possess in abundance. Great leaders' high self-awareness means they have a clear and accurate image, not just of their leadership style, but also of their own strengths and weaknesses. They know where they shine and where they're weak, and they have effective strategies for leaning into their strengths and compensating for their weaknesses. As I reflect on that little excerpt from the article, I see an abundance of self-awareness with Dr. Holland, and you'll discover that through today's interview. And that's something that I think all leaders should possess, is an awareness of themselves. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses or areas of improvement? And what am I doing about those things? It's one thing to know I struggle with listening, or I struggle with speaking up, or whatever the struggle may be. It's one thing to know it or identify it. It's something very different to actually take action and make some changes about it. So I invite you to listen to today's interview. And at the end of the day, are you aware of yourself? Are you aware of your strengths? Are you aware of areas of improvements? What are you going to do about those? Let's listen to my interview with Dr. Holland. Well, I'm here with Dr. Nicholas Holland. He is the Associate Director of Bands and the Director of Athletic Bands at Charleston Southern University in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome, Dr. Holland.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Would you tell me a little bit about you and your family?
I have a wife. We'll be married 20 years this summer, this July, and I have a 17-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter.
Wow.
And we live in actually a suburb called Mount Pleasant, and we moved here in 2011 in the summer. After teaching at the University of Memphis for 11 years, I started teaching at Charleston Southern in 2011 and have been here ever since.
Yeah, and that's where I was introduced to you at the University of Memphis. I had the pleasure and honor of serving under you. And
yes, you was my drum major my second year there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That
absolutely.
It was the time of my life, and I'll tell you, you really made an impact on me just the short time I was in the band. And I've never forgotten you, never forgot my experiences. So you were definitely someone I wanted to speak with. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
So
thanks very much.
Yeah, I'm talking about leadership. When you hear leadership, what do you think about? What comes to mind?
Well, I mean, for me, when I think of leadership right away, I think of just living in a way that is an example. There are so many things written about leadership, so many things folks will say about leadership, but at the end of the day, it's empty unless it's being walked out. And I think the best way, strongest way, perhaps most effective way to lead is just through example, through how you carry yourself, how you handle stressful things, but also how you handle just the day-to-day things in life. What's your mantra? What's the first thing you do at the morning, the last thing you do at night, whatever? What's your routine? And are you influencing or impacting your sphere of people around you? There are all sorts of great lit texts, great sermons and series, and whatever else is on leadership. But at the end of the day, I think leadership is literally just living a life that projects the meaning, the example, the sort of thrust or crux of what you are and what you stand for.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, what has helped inform that perception of leadership for you?
That's a great question. I think I've had coaches in high school, in middle school playing soccer. I've had that were not really aggressive, but had high expectations, but really not a lot of discipline. I had a track coach that was completely hands off and would just literally put it in the hands of the athletes. I've had teachers and conductors and band directors that have probably more so shaped my leadership style and philosophy more than maybe an athletic coach has. But I like to read a lot too. I think, but I'd say easily my most influential leadership model is that of Christ. I came to faith sort of late in life. I was 30 years old. I had just gotten married, and we had actually just moved to Memphis. This was 1997, and then I went to school for 3 years, and then moved to Memphis in 2000. And so, a lot of my leadership sort of strategies or ideals or thoughts about leadership stem from the lessons and sort of leadership model that Christ exemplifies. And then also, there are some key individuals throughout my undergrad and graduate studies and even my doctoral studies that are formative for sure.
Yeah. And I know for me personally, your leadership when I was in band was different than I guess most conductors and band directors that I'd had or even had seen that part of my undergrad career, and it was refreshing. And I think because there was just a gentleness to you that you could be stern also, but there was a way of just making sure that people felt love. How have you, I know you mentioned that Christ has kind of been a guide for you. How have you been able to, I guess, harness and hone in on the teachings of Christ and apply them to your life?
There are several resources out there. There's actually one that I've just started reading this past summer, or this past spring, called Leadership, the Leadership Lessons of Jesus, or what's the title of it? I think it's Mentoring Like Jesus, perhaps. And it's basically just how did he treat people? How did he teach people that didn't have spiritual ears or really the capacity to understand what he was trying to say? How did he approach and connect to them? And then how did he follow back or double back with his disciples and explain it to them in a completely different and perhaps more clear way? But how did he treat everyone that he interacted with? Jesus is the perfect sort of balance of grace and truth at all times. And that's what I shoot for. I can't say I'm anywhere close to that, but that's always the goal, is to treat every person like they matter, to treat everybody like they were worthy of Christ's sufficient work on the cross, and that will really kind of change your thinking and your philosophy, your outlook in a hurry.
Yeah.
Even people that are abrasive to you, or even disrespectful, or folks have all sorts of things that they're dealing with and going through and experiencing, and they have all kinds of backgrounds and whatever inputs that they've had throughout their lives. And Christ experienced all of them, and it was the way that he interacted with the woman at the well versus the way that he interacted with the money changers and the lenders in the temple versus the way that he interacted with children, and then the way that he interacted with Pharisees. I mean, it's a beautiful lesson, really, for us all.
And it's very interesting that you point out those different examples, because Christ is one person, but he was able to be to each person what they needed in that moment, and he never lost his authority. So that's beautiful. I'm also curious how the philosophy of leadership that you have, how does that apply to your family?
That's probably. I mean, I wish I was a better leader at home, and I've never asked that question of other leadership sort of presenters or teachers, or not really investigated that part, but I feel confident and strong and secure in my leadership ability in front of a musical ensemble, in front of a classroom, in front of peers, and in all sorts of settings and sort of just places where I'm seen and called upon to be a leader. I feel completely comfortable and confident. At home, that's completely different, which is really strange, but because it's in the home where it should be the easiest. But I struggle. I don't really struggle, but it's a constant choice to be consistent. At home, it's a constant sort of kind of praying through how do we parent correctly in any given situation, and those are a little different for my son than they would be for my daughter, and so all of that sort of fluidity just makes me feel a little like I'm on ice skates or roller skates at times, but the principles are the same. You set the example. Like in the classroom, you communicate the expectations, and then you teach or show folks how to meet or exceed those expectations, and then you help them to do that. All of that transfers directly to the home. But I can't treat my home like my classroom,
Exactly,
or my ensemble, or it's completely different. And my wife and I, we share the load for sure. I'm the spiritual leader of the home, but I'm certainly not confident or maybe egotistical enough to think that I always know the right answers. And so we make sure that we're sort of unified in what we're saying to the kids, and making sure that what really matters to one needs to matter to the other, even if we have no preference or feeling about it. So consistency in the home is I think it's always something that's on the forefront of our minds. But that's a fascinating question, because it is different at home.
And your response to you being the spiritual leader, but you don't have the ego that presumes you have all the answers. That in itself is Christ-like, and the attitude of servant leader. And I just appreciate your honesty and acknowledging, hey, I don't have all the answers. I don't have it fully together. In my work as a mental health and marriage and family therapist, some of our people, particularly our men, we have a difficult time of admitting that we don't have all the answers. How did you gain such, and I see it as confidence. How did you gain confidence in humility?
I think the easy answer is that it was supernatural. but I don't know that that is enough of an answer. I will tell you this, and I've heard a lot of parents say this, um, but for me, it was absolutely the case. The moment my child was born, my son came first, and the moment he was born, something changes. I mean, there is a switch that gets flipped in you as a parent somewhere where you instantly see um, how important you are to that person and how that person is completely 100% dependent upon you to meet their needs, to take care of them, to teach them, to raise them in the right way, to discipline them, to console them, to support them. I mean, all of that. And I don't know that I've ever been necessarily a selfish person, but I think any human being should admit, at least to some degree, of being a little self-centered. Certainly at times, maybe more so than others. But and the other thing too, for me being a parent and a father especially, my dad left our family when I was 8, and so I never had dad show me how to throw or hit a baseball or put something together or build a birdhouse or all the things, the stereotypical things that dads are supposed to teach their kids.
Mm-hmm.
I never had that, and I turned out kind of okay, thank God. So it's kind of but that has always been ready, sort of in the back of my spirit, to be unleashed upon my children. And so anytime they want to go play catch or read books or color, or, I mean, and we still do those types of things, even though they're teenagers. Anytime they want to learn how to build something or study music, or, I mean, I try to drop what I'm doing and jump at it because it's just important. And what you do, I don't think it matters as much as that you're doing it.
Yeah.
And kind of getting in there and just doing life with your wife and your children and living out the example of Christ. Because I mean, that's when we have children, that's really our only job.
Yeah.
Is to just show them what Christ is like. And then we are almost to the stage of what I'm most nervous about as a parent, and that is releasing them into the world. I don't quite know how to do that yet. And I'm not looking forward to it, if that makes any sense.
It does, and I think most parents, feel that anxiety and apprehension, because you've invested, for years into these human beings, and now you're about to release them into the world.
Yeah.
When you all moved to Memphis, you mentioned going to school and then getting your doctoral degree. How did you find time to balance, going to school and working and building a family? Because you mentioned how important it is just to be there. How did you find that balance?
It was really the first 4 years, because I'd finished the coursework, and so all I had to do was the paper. So I had the research proposal was sort of intact, but not really. So it was not quite ground zero from the dissertation, but it was pretty close when we got the job and moved to Memphis. And my son was born 6 weeks before we moved, so it was a brand new job, brand new part of the world that I've never lived in, brand new family, brand new kind of everything. And it was hard. It was, but there were a few kind of choices that we as a family, my wife and I, made along the way, and that was when rehearsal's over, when the last sort of class or whatever, at the end of the day it's done, then I come home and I leave work at work, whenever possible. It wasn't always possible, but that was more often than not. It was work is at work, home is at home.
Yeah.
And that was hard too, because I'm a band director, so I mean part of some of my favorite times of being a band director are after rehearsals, just decompressing in the office or in the band room afterwards, and just being around the students. And generally that's the funniest moments, or I mean that's where sort of that you really get a sense of the ensemble and how the kids are doing.
Right.
Is that sort of window of time right afterwards. But I cut that out, and that was tough. But it's a choice, and I think it's worth it. You make the choice, you stick to it as best you can, and your family is the winner in all of it.
Definitely.
The hard part about also being an athletic band director is that you miss a lot of things that your kids will go off and do. So trying, when at all possible, to not have school activities when the kids are doing stuff, so that you can be there and be a part of it. And that was from me. That was from growing up, because my mom was a single mom of four of us, and I ran track and played soccer, and I think she only got to see me play soccer once, and I think she only got to come to one track meet of the whole time.
Yeah.
And I wish she could have come more. My dad was able to come to more than that, and it was neat having a parent there, but it wasn't my mom.
Sure.
So I try real hard to move things around whenever I can to make it to whatever the kids are doing. My son's an athlete, so he's got lots of games and travel basketball and whatever else all summers, and then the season. And if I miss something, it's because there was just no way around it. My daughter dances and sings, and she played in the band, and so she had a busier schedule than he did, and the same kind of thing. Those their events were of paramount importance, and if at all possible, I think how to balance that when you're having to do so much that you just choose. And it was pretty. I'd say physically, it was pretty unhealthy for sure, because I would work all day. I would come home and be with my wife and my son until he went to bed, and he was young, so it helped. But and then Caroline came along in 2003, so I was still working and writing and whatever else. But it was the last, I'd say, from 2002 and 3 all the way to graduation in 2004 that was the hardest, and that was work all day, come home and be a parent and a father, or a husband and a father, put the kids to bed, and then hit the computer and write until basically I'd fall asleep on the keyboard about 2 in the morning. I'd go to sleep for a few hours, get the kids up, get them to school, and go to work and do it again for about 15 months.
Yeah.
And so it was tough, but it's what had to be done, and praise God, He gave me the strength to do it.
Amen. And for me personally, my father was not there in my childhood, and I remember this image of you, either freshman or sophomore year, I don't recall, but I remember just watching you with your wife Karen, and little Nicholas was in the stroller, and during rehearsals, practice, or games, you all were together. The band was marching in. I saw you with your family, walking in together. You still, led the band, but I watched you make that time for your family, and they were there with you, and that stood out to me. And that you made time, you made space, and and Karen's schedule was flexible where she could do that. But you made room for your family, and that I've never forgotten that.
Yeah, it mattered. I mean, it mattered to us very much. And there's still times when Karen and the kids are sort of, they're at home and whatever, doing their thing, and I'm over here working with the band and whatnot, and it's kind of this sort of faraway place almost, and the two don't ever really interact, but that's rare.
Yeah.
For sure. Especially in Memphis. Because I think there's so many great memories of the kids growing up with the band kids. And,
yeah.
Some of from Nicholas hanging out in the trumpet section every game to Caroline and the piccolos or wherever. It was just what they did.
And in my experience as a therapist, I've seen firsthand the importance of healthy relationships in families, and I personally believe that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think it's in the family where people should be really getting a sense of how to get along with others, how to see other people's perspectives and opinions and respect them. Even if you disagree, you can still respect where they are and you can still love them. And I think it's within the family that we can really teach that appropriately. Because honestly, if you've got four people in a family and one of them is ultra selfish, then there's conflict 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the responsibility of that unit is to mold and shape and help people just learn how to be kind and respect each other and put others before yourself, and just how to be a well-functioning person in society. One of my sort of prevailing feelings about where we are as human beings today is that we've forgotten the value of other people. With all of the shootings and the attacks and whatever else there's so little value of human life anymore. And I think, honestly, it's within the family where we can teach that and kind of just fix that. It's kind of funny. I just heard a graduation speech by a valedictorian from a school here in the area, and he was talking about so many commencement speeches ceremoniously talk about changing the world, and he wanted to kind of say the same thing, but he didn't want us to change the world by changing people's minds, but instead to change their hearts. And it was it's a really tremendous young man that goes to my church, and so that's why we were there. And it was just preaching on the fruits of the Spirit.
That's right.
And then if we really want to change the world, we need to start with our hearts.
Yes.
And I get it. It's biblically predicted. We're going to be struggling with this. But at the same time, Christ overcame the world, so we can too.
That's right.
But it's changing the heart, and it's in the heart where you put others before yourself. It's in the heart where you value other people, their opinions, even if you disagree. It's in the heart where you share with one another, and you carry each other's burdens, and you provide for one another, and you help each other. And that's my great passion for where we are now. That's kind of my driving force as a teacher, as a conductor, as a parent, as a whatever I do, is to help people understand the power of love. Honestly, we were created to be in fellowship with God and with each other, and I think we've lost that second one.
I agree.
And it could be, maybe it's we're focusing too much vertically and not living out horizontally. I don't know. There's lots of questions that remain in here, but the fundamental issue to me is that we've stopped loving people. We've stopped placing any value on human life, regardless of religious background or where you're from in the world or the pigment of your skin or your gender or whatever.
I agree 100%.
To double back, I think that's on the family. And it's how important, it really kind of underscores how important it is for parents to raise their kids well. You think about students or kids that are creating or participating in acts of violence these days. Where's their heart? Where's that bias come from? They've gotten it from somewhere, and my guess is it started in the home.
Mm-hmm.
The role of the parents, especially, I think, is more pronounced than ever and more important than ever to make sure that kids are raised the right way.
And that's precisely why I've started this podcast, to bring awareness and to bring that conversation to the table and to help strengthen our families, because it's out of the families that the world leaders come. And, parents have a very integral role in developing people. I appreciate you taking this time for my interview.
Leadership is, to me, it's not really necessarily a moving or a changing target, but it's a target that I don't think we ever get there.
Okay.
And it's like, it's being a lifelong learner. I think we should all sort of be lifelong leaders and learning how to lead better. I'm so thankful you're doing this, because this is going to bless people, and people will be able to come to this and get some tips and some thoughts and some ideas and run with them. This is huge.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, as well as providing a rating and review. And every week I will interview a different leader and invite them to share with us their views and perspective on the relationship between leadership and family. Be sure to visit my website. It's www.alvinbonds2nd.com. That's ALVINBONDSII.com. Have a great day.